just take a look at these outdoor tomatoes. They really are pathetic. Now, even though I have got some tomatoes on these plants, it really is a bit of a fail this year. The weather has just jumped from one extreme to another, and tomatoes are quite a stressy plant, and they don't like dramatic change in temperatures or water conditions or sunlight to cloudy all the time. They really do throw a hissy fit. Now, whereas these tomatoes, now there's many different varieties here. Some varieties have done definitely better than others, and we have experimented this year with much more varieties than what we would do normally. Some we would try and grow again. Some I just don't think they're actually very good for outdoor tomatoes. But they've all got quite good, thick, healthy stems. Having that outdoor breeze actually does help them thicken up somewhat, so they can actually stand up against any of our UK weather. But the height of these, now they're only literally a few feet high, if that. Now they have been grown in grow bags, which I've not used before, and to be honest, it's pants. All the larger pots that I normally put my tomatoes in and put them into the grow bag with the bottoms cut off, my husband used, so I had to have much smaller. The flowers, a lot of the flowers, when they did start actually producing, were knocked off by the real extreme winds that we just keep getting all the time this year. This year I've never known it to be as blustery as it is, right from January all the way up to now in July. Now, I have seen some insects pollinate, but maybe not as prolific as in previous years. Now we have got, again, we do have some of these with tomatoes on, and even the beautiful indigo rose, which is a beautiful black looking tomato. But it's hardly worth all this when you're only getting a handful of tomatoes on each one. In all the previous years that when we've grown tomatoes outside, we've had kilos and kilos of tomatoes off all these bushes. Now, these will carry on growing, and even though they're small at the moment, I've got my fingers crossed that they should get nice and high on this trellis. But I'm not overly hopeful this year because of how strange it actually has been. I think I've only lost one here to slug damage, which was right at the very beginning, and then all the rest have managed to avoid that outcome. But I think this may be a complete disaster for us for the outdoor tomatoes, which is a bit of a shame. Now, it was a bit more of an experiment. We have 3 different growing areas for tomatoes, never mind the random ones that we've planted throughout the allotment. We have them here, we have them in a no-dig bed, and then we have them in our polytunnel. Now, our polytunnel ones, fantastic, doing really, really well with masses of fruit. Our no-dig bed ones are a lot smaller than what actually these are. Now, my theory is these are actually bigger than the no-dig bed ones, because being in a grow bag and a black plastic pot, I think actually the sun has been heating that black pot, making that soil temperature much warmer, which could be better for the tomatoes. They've all had the same amount of food and pretty much the same amount of water. Now, obviously, when it does rain, we have no control over that, and I'm not putting covers and stuff on my tomatoes. Whatever rainfall they get, they get. But I do think with the earlier plantings and being in that black pot and the soil warmth going up, I think it actually pushed them on a little bit further than being in the bare soil. But really, it's a really disappointing year so far for our outdoor tomatoes. So in the no-dig bed, even though they're roughly about the same height, give or take, there's a few that is failing to thrive. The stems aren't as thick. And to be honest, the ones that are laden with fruit, they're barely above my knee. Now this particular bed has been really disappointing this year. I think the grow bags have got a little bit more of an up on them because, again, I do think it was the extra warmth of the pot keeping the roots and the plants that little bit warmer. Where in this bed we had a lot of failures. We in fact had to replace about 80% over time of this bed with other tomato plants. So I have no idea what's growing here now. Now most of that was actually rotting off in the ground. The ground at the time had been quite wet and it took a little while to actually dry out. We also had a lot of damage on our roots from actual insects and things like that as well. So this bed has really had to contend with a lot this year, not just the insect damage and the weather, but also the local fox. Will I grow tomatoes in this bed next year? Maybe, but I think I will actually cut the bottom of a pot and actually plant them into a pot and then put it into the ground. I do actually think that pot keeps the plant nice and warm when you're planting out that little bit earlier. And I think this just actually helps get them nice and thick and going. There's definitely some varieties that I won't be bothering with next year, not for outdoors anyway. But these varieties have grown very well inside our polytunnel. Now in the polytunnel, they have done exceptionally well, and this is the first year that we've actually grown in a polytunnel. It's the first year of actually owning one. We've always done outdoor tomatoes and still done really, really well. Now we used to grow them at home a lot, but when we moved on to this allotment last year and we grew our outdoor tomatoes pretty much in grow bags, we ended up with kilos and kilos of tomatoes. Now in here, yes, I know it's a bit crowded, but they are doing very, very well. And as you can see, some of them are incredibly tall and they are quite happy. We've had less issues with pest damage in here. We have had issues with ants' nests right in the base of the tomatoes' roots. This has caused so many issues with tomatoes and eventually it's killed them off. And I think we've lost 2 to this, which is very frustrating when you're getting this close to any kind of harvest and you come in and your tomato is completely drooped because of the ant's nest. So the tomatoes in here are really, really pushing on. Now we have all sorts of varieties in here, and it's well over 20 odd varieties that we actually have got in here. And some are even starting to ripen, which is great. Now this is the honeybee, and this is quite laden with fruit. A really stark difference compared to what's going on outside. Now, we have had some weird ones come on. We have had these. Now, these kind of things do happen, and it's still edible, even if you just chop it up a little bit. But these kind of things can happen on your tomatoes. And these are the ones that we managed to salvage off of the tomato plant that the ants had actually destroyed the root system. These should still ripen up, but it's such a shame to waste any. So we're going to try and ripen these up by just being in the warmth, which actually normally works quite well. So that's our tomatoes. I think the outdoor crop, I don't think we're going to get anything near what we had before. But luckily we actually have got our indoor tomatoes, and looking at the way the weather's been in the last few years anyway, I think in future years we'll probably just stick to our indoor varieties. It is such a shame that I'm probably not going to get as much of a good crop of those tomatoes outside as I have done in previous years. It really is quite disappointing. So how has your tomatoes been, guys? How have your outdoor tomatoes been? Is yours the same as mine, quite spindly and small and weak this year? Or does it look like it's going to be an absolute bumper crop for you and one of the best years of growing that you've had? I'm not that jealous. Let me know in the comments, guys, what kind of issues you've had with your tomatoes this year. Now, there's loads of issues that you can have with your tomatoes, from splitting to blossom end rot to blight to everything else. And fingers crossed, I'm really hoping that this isn't going to be an added issue to anything that we're growing tomato-wise this year. because I really do have some big plans for all my tomatoes this year. It does seem to be the year for having issues this year. Out of all the years of growing, this year seems to be a lot more problematic than any other year that I've had.